An effective short story can be, my daughter was pulled out of class and met one-on-one with a counselor and was told that, because she had some kind of anxiety, that she was probably a boy stuck in a girl's body, and that this went on without our knowledge, without our permission and consent for 6 months. And I'm running to make sure that no other parent has that experience again. Most voters have no idea that there's a school board election. They have no idea who's currently sitting on the school board. They have no idea who's running. And I think if they were being really candid with you, they probably don't even want to know or care, because if they have to know and care, something's probably wrong. And now they have to do something about it, right? If I'm a voter and I have one opponent knock on my door on a Saturday and they say they're running for school board because they're running for safe schools. Okay, great. Take their lit, close the door, move on. Sunday, the other opponent comes and knocks on my door and says they're running for safe schools. The voter thinks, I don't have to do anything, because no matter what, somebody who is running for safe schools wins. Now, it's very important to understand that if the first candidate that showed up means safe schools is keeping criminal activity out of the buildings, making sure there's a safe police presence, making sure we don't have illicit substances. But candidate B means by safe schools, we're going to force everybody to use the pronoun of the moment, and we're going to let boys in girls' bathrooms and locker rooms if that's how they feel comfortable. As a voter, I would have liked to have really understood that difference.
Well, hello, moms, dads, and grands, and welcome back to M for All Academy. I'm Missy Karwowski, and if you're new here, we like to say this is the school for parents, grandparents, and friends who are dedicated to fighting for the survival of America with educating you on, or by educating you on topics that impact kids, school, and parental rights. Now, whenever I introduce myself to someone who's never heard of Moms for Liberty, I simply tell them we are a parental rights advocacy group. But that could mean a lot of different things. Advocacy, what exactly is that? So we are going to be exploring the different ways that Moms for Liberty advocates for parental rights. The Moms for Liberty mission explains we are dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. So how do we fight, though? What are the ways that we actually get involved? Well, the tactics and strategies are kind of listed out on our website, but the one that we're going to focus on today is activate to public service. When you hear this, you might first think of running for Senate or to be a representative, but in reality, there are so many local positions, so many positions in local government that actually have a huge impact on your daily life, and people just don't get involved. According to the New York Times, only about 15 to 27% of eligible voters actually even vote in their local elections, which is pretty crazy because truly the local government positions, that's really what's having the biggest impact on your daily life. To help us unpack one of the offices in particular that we focus on with Moms for Liberty is it's specifically the school board candidate. And most people, I think this was pretty overlooked. I will candidly say I never really thought about it or cared about it prior to 2020. But we have with us today Erika Sheets, our political director, because she has all sorts of experience with what it looks like to run for office. She even has an amazing training toolkit available that she brings out all across the country. So welcome to the program, Erika.
Thanks, Missy. And hi to everybody watching.
So let's start out. If you want to give a little introduction of exactly what your role is, and then help us understand why are local politics so important?
Sure. So, Moms for Liberty, the national organization itself, and each individual chapter is actually a 501c4 nonprofit. So, we're not inherently a political organization. We're not a PAC. We're not a 501c3. And we do cross into politics, though, because most school board elections in the United States are elected positions. So, school board, I should say, school board seats, most of them are elected positions. And so, when we are helping parents defend their parental rights at the level of government that is public education, and the school board and administration and the school district, et cetera, isn't following the law or isn't listening to parents, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that it may be time for some new people on the school board. And so that created a need for a role like mine. So, as the political director for Moms for Liberty National, it's my job to help our roughly 300 chapters in 48 states, if they choose to get involved in their school board elections, and they do get to choose, then I help them with training and tools and resources to help the people they're supporting get elected.
That's awesome. So I think that's fantastic that you have that we have this with available to candidates, because I think a lot of people are really afraid to get involved. They don't necessarily know what to do and how to do it and where to even start. So maybe you could explain also why, I think a lot of times when we pay attention to the news and or even watch the news, it feels like all of the focus is on Washington and what's happening in Washington. If there's parents struggling maybe with a desire to avoid politics, or maybe they're afraid of getting in politics like we were talking about, or don't know how to, why is it a good idea to start local instead of thinking like you just have to go to Washington?
It's so true. I do think the proliferation of media focus on Washington is one of the reasons why we all see and hear more of that. Even if you're someone who just sort of scans the headlines, really doesn't pay a lot of attention, or maybe even has your local news on in the background while you're doing something else, right? You're getting snippets, and that might be all you're really hearing about, or most of what you're really hearing about. So that's one part of it. But I don't think people take the time generally to really take a look at, if you look at your entire outgoing tax bill, right? Depending on where you live, you may have city taxes, you may have neighborhood taxes like an HOA, you may have county taxes, state taxes, and federal taxes. But the large majority of all taxes that are paid are inside your state. So they are local. They may not be state taxes per se. It may be the consumption tax in your city. It may be your city taxes. It may be your county taxes. For example, where I happen to live, 51% of my city taxes go to my school district.
Wow.
And when you tell people that around here, they kind of double take a little bit. So it really is amazing how much of your taxes are actually local versus federal. In addition to that, in terms of your daily life and what the governance rules are around your daily life, whether it's the speed. Um, Speed on your local streets, right? How your school districts are organized, how your city operates, whether or not those roles are paid roles or volunteers, your zoning boards, if you want to do some kind of addition or work on your house, right? Every little aspect of your everyday life is most likely affected, at the very least, if not totally controlled, but heavily affected by some kind of local office. I mean, even in just the water coming into your house, city water. I mean, the title of that person can change, but it could be the water commissioner, or the water board president, or whatever the name is, right? And I mean, myself included, I couldn't tell you the name of that. As much as I like to think of myself as a high information voter, I couldn't tell you the name of that person in my city. And yet, if all of a sudden the water stopped working, it would be a big problem, right? So, on one hand, it's a lot to keep track of. On the other hand, I don't think people hear enough about it. And then lastly, I think people don't take the time to actually take a look and see what is affecting most of their everyday life.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you hit it on the head, first of all, with talking about the media attention. I feel like there's so much attention on the national politics, which makes it easy. And some of the stuff it just sounds so terrifying or so big or whatever. So it's easy to get sucked into that. And maybe the day to day, the local stuff sounds a little more mundane and easier to overlook, but it is so important. And I am just as guilty of that, of not necessarily knowing every single person. I get the titles mixed up, but I do definitely, I'm so thankful for organizations like Moms for Liberty that have helped open up my eyes to the importance of local politics so that I'm paying attention. I will candidly say, and I am happy to say, I know I'm not the only person who had this. As high informed as I thought I was, I often didn't even realize there were off cycle elections happening. And I would see these signs for, because there's elections every year, but I would see signs, and frankly, I'd wonder, did people just leave up their sign from last year? What's going
Right.
on? And it just seems so strange to me. So why can you talk for a quick minute about, because I know we'll get into some of the things about numbers later, but can you emphasize or clarify why even a small number of votes can have such a big impact in local races like school boards?
Yes. In fact, this is one of the points I make really strongly in our in-person training workshops that I do. We call that the winning workshop. But one of the points I really make is that the positive, the silver lining of turnout, like you mentioned, turnout being so low, is that you don't have to have 80 or 90% of the voting population voting for you to win, right? So there's a lot of good news there because um, people all over kind of recognize that there can be a machine when it comes to running for office, right? It's sort of just the slang that I use to describe when there is a mechanism, a set of mechanisms built that really do the work for the candidate, right? It involves a lot of media and money and mouthpieces to spray the entire eligible voter base with your message and hope that you turn out enough votes. And that can be really expensive. If you are in a county race, let's say some school boards, like in Florida, even a school board seat is the entire county. They'll have one school district that's the entire county. Where I live, we have a county but have six school districts within that, right? So you don't have to, if you're a candidate for one of those school board races, you only have to reach out to voters that are eligible to vote in those school districts. So even a county-wide race is a lot of voters to reach that way, which you can imagine costs a lot of money. It actually takes, on average, 7 to 10 touches to turn into a vote. So
Mm.
if you have to reach out to hundreds of thousands of voters 7 to 10 times each on average, right? And a touch can be a lot of things. It can be they saw a social media post of yours, they drove by one of your signs, right? They saw someone wearing your t-shirt, they heard you speak somewhere, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that those are always postcards showing up at your house or you showing up at their house. But that's still a lot of outreach, right? And as the numbers go up, the expense goes up to be able to do that. And most people don't take 2 or 3 years to run for an office. Even a statewide office like a governorship, I mean, usually they begin really actively running maybe 18 months, a little under two, maybe 20, 22 months ahead of the election date. So even to cover an entire state. So hopefully that that touches a little bit on what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. It's funny because there's the pro and con to the exact same thing. Like you just said, that the benefit is for someone who's running. You don't necessarily, because of a low voter turnout, you don't have to have, the vast majority. The downside, for really whoever's running and whoever's trying to push their goals, and our case, obviously, trying to preserve American heritage and our amazing country with our culture of liberty, as we like to say. But as we're trying to do that, there are, of course, people on the other side who are very much trying to dismantle that. And so they can also, unfortunately, win with a much smaller turnout. And it's important for people to remember that. And I think it leads into my very next question to you, which is, what do you say to someone who might think that their vote won't make a difference? Because I hear that all the time.
Yeah, it can really feel that way sometimes. Even just as a voter, I understand that feeling for sure. I will, before I totally get into answer that, I want to just comment on what you just said before the question, which is that the other side, the people looking to flout the laws of this country, to tear down the virtues and values and institutions of this country, could do the same thing too. But what we found is they don't. And they haven't up to this point, and they haven't had to up to this point because they've been highly organized and very well financed. And I think as a country, we're all learning a lot about how that's actually taken place. So they have, by and large, utilized that machine playbook that I just described, right? Where they've got a machine doing the major outreach for them. And they really just are usually somebody who's pretty nondescript that, they've sort of installed as the face of the machine efforts. So they haven't had to do the grassroots campaign, which is essentially what I'm talking about. So to the people who say, "Oh, it feels like my vote doesn't even matter," I would definitely say, take a look. And even just like a quick AI search. I mean, anymore we have access to a quick Grok or ChatGPT or whatever you use to even just say, right, what were in the top local races in the most recent election? What was the winning vote number? Like, what was the difference, the delta? Right? And you're going to find out it's usually pretty close. It's not that many votes. In school board elections, there are school board elections that have been decided certainly by less than 100 votes, less than 50 votes, oftentimes. Someone who I know well, who, when our chapter launched 5 years ago, we jumped in and endorsed, won his race by 11 votes that year.
Wow.
And that was in 2021 when people were engaged, right?
Yeah.
It was a 5 alarm fire when it came to schools. So your vote really does matter. And I think that message is also good news, bad news a little bit for voters, from the standpoint that if you realize it matters and you care about trying to be responsible with that duty, that means you probably need to do a little bit of work to find out, okay, who's worthy of your vote, right? And it's like a lot of things, like once you see something and then you realize, ooh, now I have to do something about it. Like, it's sort of a good news, bad news situation, right? Because people are busy. I mean, I get it. I'm in starting a new stage of life where our children are young adults now. We just wrapped up the K through 12 experience in the last year, but I understand how people work, and they're juggling lots of different responsibilities and aging parents and kids and all kinds of other things. So it can feel stressful, or it can feel like one more thing to go, oh, now I need to figure out who's running for water commissioner, or who are these judges, or what I mean, school board, right? One of the things I tell candidates in the beginning of our winning workshop training is to say, you have to remember that the environment you're operating in is, most voters have no idea that there's a school board election. They have no idea who's currently sitting on the school board. They have no idea who's running. And I think if they were being really candid with you, they probably don't even want to know or care, because if they have to know and care, something's probably wrong. And now they have to do something about it, right? So that's the good news, bad news about the fact that your vote really does matter. And so one of the things that we try and do at Moms for Liberty is to make it as easy as possible for voters to understand who is out there that's aligned with your values, right? How do we make it, I like to say, stupid easy? How do we make it stupid easy for our candidates to reach out to the people who are most likely to vote and most likely to be value aligned, to understand why they need to get up and do something about it at this election?
And that absolutely touches on, or kind of already addresses, a lot of the things that I was going to ask about, um, in a good way, about people feeling overwhelmed and avoiding politics, because I feel like that is one of the biggest things that I hear. It's a objection, I guess, in general, but it's not even, and it truly is just as a voter, not even trying to get someone to run as a candidate, but asking people their opinion on something that is happening, whatever it is. And it feels like especially busy moms will often say, oh, politics are too stressful. It's just makes me feel anxious. I don't want to pay any attention to it. So I don't know if you have like a panacea, solve all the problem. Probably not. I think we're all facing a struggle there. But how do you think we could encourage people to pay attention even a little bit without making them feel like they have to become political experts? You said that we try to make it stupid easy. What do we do with that?
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind is it is real. It's a real thing that people can learn something, whether it's local or federal or in the world, right? In the larger world, they learn that there's a problem, right? Maybe even a really big problem, and especially if they feel like they can't do a lot about it, then it's like the double stress. Right now I just have the worry without feeling like I can really make a difference in it. Right, more often than not, especially the closer it actually is to you, you really can do something, even if you just show up and vote at all your elections. And of course there's always more that can be done too, but that's a real thing. Right, so just recognizing that and understanding that that's true for a lot of people, and it can help them to understand that when you are messaging about something that needs attention, that there is something they can do about it that's actually doable. Right, you don't all of a sudden have to become this, super a mile deep knowledge base on, the water systems of your city, for example. Right, I keep using that because I don't know anything about it except for when a water main bursts, and then I'm like, hey, what are those guys doing? Right,
Mm-hmm.
right, typical reaction. But so I do think that making it as easy as possible to be knowledgeable in an effective way, right? So it can feel a little bit, sometimes people can feel a little all or nothing, right?
Mm.
Like if I just stay completely out of it, I'm stress free, I don't have to worry, I just look elsewhere. Or I have to now have this like mastery level of deep knowledge. And anything in between just doesn't exist. Well, we know that's not true. So, in helping people understand, for example, with school boards, right, that there is a school board election and why should you care, right? We emphasize a 30-second elevator speech with our candidates. We call it the
Mm.
My Why. But essentially, in 30 seconds or less, if the candidate can effectively answer these three questions for a voter, it makes it very easy for them. And that is, why should they care that there's a school board election right now, right? Why you, right? Like, why should I bother considering you if I do care? And thirdly, why do I have to get up and do something about it now? Right. So I'll use the example in the training that if I'm a voter and I have one opponent doing a school board race knock on my door on a Saturday, and they introduce themselves and say they're running for school board because they're running for safe schools. Okay, great. Take their lit, close the door, move on. Sunday, the other opponent comes and knocks on my door and says they're running for safe schools. Okay, great. What I explain to candidates is the voter thinks I don't have to do anything, because no matter what, somebody who is running for safe schools wins. I'm going to get safe schools either way. Now, it's very important to understand that if the first candidate that showed up means safe schools is keeping criminal activity out of the buildings, right? Making sure there's a safe police presence, right? Making sure we don't have illicit substances and other problems in our school buildings, and that's what they mean by safe schools. But candidate B means by safe schools, we're going to force everybody to use the pronoun of the moment, and we're going to let boys in girls' bathrooms and locker rooms if that's how they feel comfortable, and that's how they see safe schools. As a voter, I would have liked to have really understood that difference. But if you're not messaging properly and you don't make it really stupid easy for them to realize they should care, they should vote for you, and yes, they have to get up and do it now. That urgency piece is almost always what's missing from any candidate's messaging. Candidates do a decent job talking about themselves, but they don't typically proactively answer why somebody should care. There's just this implied assumption that everyone cares, right?
Yeah.
And maybe esoterically they do care, right? But practically speaking, right, and bringing it right to their doorstep as to why should you care that you can vote in a school board election this year, right? Much less, why do you have to get up and do it and make sure it gets done? Because it can be easy to say things like, okay, I'm, Erika Sheets and I'm running for school board to make our schools better. Well, that's great. Like every year, someone's going to want to make our schools better, I hope. Right. So it doesn't feel particularly urgent. Like, well, everyone's going to be doing that. So, I don't really, that's how a voter will think that's not something I need to necessarily get involved in. So does that make sense?
Oh my gosh, it totally does. And I actually love that you highlight the importance of, and you didn't like officially say this, but what I'm totally getting is that the voter doesn't even necessarily have this conscious thought. I think that's really the key here, is that they're not they're not maliciously saying, "Oh, I don't have to go vote." It's just the message that is implied and that they're going to get because there's no clearer statement being made and no urgency added there. And I want to reiterate the importance of what you covered as far as the capture of language and truly defining terms, because so many people just still don't realize somehow. I genuinely don't know how, but somehow people don't realize that the left has so captured language and redefined terms to be things that are completely different than what the majority of Americans, do believe have grown up with that definition. And so that is really, really critical to make sure that people understand that you need to clarify, which I want to get a little extra clarity on that, or maybe dive into this a bit more. So when the way that you presented it, it sounds like you're saying it's better for a candidate to have a really clear message. Because and I ask it that way because I just watched the main Senate debate, because boy, that's interesting. And it reminded me of all the squishy answers that always come in. There's let's not really say anything. We're going to give you a word salad that sort of says, maybe repeats back your question, just turned into a statement, but I don't actually pick a side at all. So do you find that candidates do better when they have a real clear message of where they stand on a particular point?
Yeah, this is a really important question because what happens almost all the time when a first time candidate starts putting the feelers out and talking to some people about, hey, I'm thinking about running, especially if they're a Republican, right? And Moms for Liberty is nonpartisan. The good news is we can work with anybody if they're aligned with our mission and values, right? We're not tied to one party or another. But what typically happens if you're looking to run for office as a Republican is you get this. The wizards of smart, right? These political consultant class, right? And the people who have run before, and none of them may or may not have been successful, but they think they know a lot because they've been around. But they're going to tell you to dial it back and tone it down, and you need to make your message appeal to the widest possible audience to get the most votes. And when you hear that, what does that sound like? Does that sound like the playbook I described at the beginning of our conversation of the machine, right? If you
Yeah.
are running the machine playbook and that playbook works, if you have those resources, right? So if you are trying to get those 7 to 10 touchers for every eligible voter, and that's your way that you're trying to get enough votes to win, there's something to be said for that. And then the bigger the numbers, the more that can be the case. Because why? Because you're reaching out to every eligible voter, right?
Hmm.
So the problem can be if you are running the machine playbook, but you don't have the resources of the machine, you don't have the media doing the work for you, you don't have the money to do 7 to 10 touches on average for hundreds of thousands of people, you don't have the local mouthpieces doing candidate outreach for you or voter outreach for you. If you try to run that playbook without the resources, it's almost always a guaranteed loss, because what happens is you only get to a certain amount with your limited resources, and you really haven't targeted who is most likely to show up and vote for you. So there's a couple of lessons there. One is you're absolutely right. The left doesn't just confuse words. They intentionally use the same words, but they have a very different definition of them. And the average person doesn't understand that that's what's happening. In addition to that, if you are trying to run without that level of resource, then you really need to look at running a grassroots campaign, and that is completely different. And so, if you are targeting a very specific subset of eligible voters, and you are just trying to get that subset to turn out for you, then your messaging needs to make sure that it's going to be very effective with that subset, and really nobody else matters.
This leads into a question that I wanted to um, unpack, or just a topic, is talking about what sort of skills a school board candidate maybe should have. Because I think a lot of times people, someone says, oh, you should run for office, or, whatever. But if someone's going to do that, what sort of qualities should they maybe reflect and expect to have?
It's a great question, because this is another thing that's used against the everyday person, is the "you're not qualified," right? And "you're not an expert." And that's meant to be exclusionary. It's meant so that um, groups that are their own little bubble, and that often favor the institutions, and that institutions word can describe a few different things, whether it's industries or otherwise, but basically insiders, right? So it's a control mechanism so that nobody busts into their insider circle, right? And so they make an everyday citizen feel like, you're not qualified, right? Who are you to go sit on school board? You're just a mom, or you're just a dad. So I think the answer is, the way our founders set our country up as a representative republic. Headline, it's not a democracy. Headline, the founders made very specific multitude of cases as to why it's not a democracy and what the dangers are in a democracy, right? But
Hmm.
what they envisioned was that the everyday citizen would actually be involved, because this is a self governing structure, right? And that everybody would spend time representing their neighbors, and their fellow citizens, to help govern each other. It was also never designed to be anywhere near the size and complexity that it is, even on a local level, certainly not at the federal level. And so it's also understandable why the everyday person sits back and goes like, "Oh my gosh, like this is, if you've ever sat down with a school district budget, or your city budget, or a bond proposal, or anything like that, or some of the decisions the cities have to make, where a developer wants to come in and do some kind of new project, right? And they're kind of forecasting and numbers, right? You can sit back, and it's easy to sit back and go, gosh, I don't have the professional skills to do those things. I'm not qualified, right? But here's the reality. The reality is, it was never designed to keep the everyday person out. That evolved because insiders wanted it that way. And so you have to understand that if you're a citizen who has education, meaning you are literate, right? You obviously are an adult, and you have some level of life experience. Most adults have some level of professional experience, right? And that also includes running a family. Even if you have been a stay at home mom for the last 15 years or what have you, and you haven't had additional work outside the house. Ask any stay-at-home mom if how many jobs she actually has, right? So I remember several years back when my husband and I were looking at life insurance because our kids were little, and trying to decide an amount. And he was like, well, like, your amount should be a lot smaller because of the income, right? He's just looking at the x amount of income. And I was like, okay, here's what you're not seeing. If something actually happened to me, you have to look at what it would cost you to replace me. And you'd
Mm-hmm.
have to hire about 6 people to replace me. Let's add up what that would cost, and that's the reality. So, I think the overall message is simple. If you're going to run for a state treasurer job, that job requires a very high level of finance understanding. I think if you are running for that job and you don't have that level of understanding through professional work and or academic experience, I think it's probably not a great match. Right. I think if you are running for school board and you're a convicted sex offender, that's not a great match. Right. Like, that's another way you're not qualified. Right. So I think sometimes there's some logic to this, but there's no question that most of the time, that qualified expert phrase is used to keep the insiders in and everybody else out.
So, what qualities would you say that voters do look for in a local candidate, especially focusing, since that is really our big focus, the school board? So, especially for school board candidates.
Yes, I think they really appreciate an authentic person. In the messaging conversation we were having, one of the things that we do in the winning workshop training is I have them stop and draft out their 30-second elevator speech, and that includes their platform, right, which is the 1 to 3 reasons that got them up off the couch to run for office, right? Why? Because I'm sure they have lots of things they would want to accomplish, but what are the things that they really are running on this time, right? And oftentimes what'll happen when we start working with the drafts, right, and then we workshop it with the group, is that it can oftentimes be written very formally and feel like it has to be this very markety, buzzwordy
Mm.
kind of thing, and that somehow sounds more credible or political or candidate-y, or credible in some way. And what I help them understand is, go back to stupid easy, right? First of all, is it stupid easy for you to remember to say exactly that 100 times a day? Right? No, it's not. Also, like, if it's not easy for the person who's listening to you, they're going to tune out. You have 7 seconds when you make contact with someone. If you call them, or they open the door and you've knocked on it, or you meet somebody at a meet and greet, or what have you have 7 seconds while they're deciding if they're even going to listen to the rest of what you say.
Wow.
Right. So, it really, authenticity, confidence, comfort, I think, are the things that people really look for. They want to hear why you got up off the couch and are running for school board, especially if you haven't been someone who's run for lots of offices, because why would you do that? People don't do that, right? And so they want to hear what is special to you that got you motivated to say, okay, I'm willing to get in the arena and do something about this. So authenticity is huge. And then I talk about in their messaging that tangibleness, right? So it's like what we were saying with the safe schools example, right?
Hmm.
What I would have coached someone on, even on the safe schools example, would be to say, even if whether it was candidate A or B, right, it would be, give them something tangible that brings it right to their doorstep. Like, if the safe schools person, around criminal behavior or drugs or what have you, if it's like, we've had X amount of arrests on our school property in the last 5 years, right? Or we've had we've had this amount of criminal activity that's gone on, right? Or we've had X amount of substance abuse. I was somewhere where, one of the people running for school board had talked about how they had kids that were overdosing in their school district. Yeah.
Wow.
Right. So, giving some kind of either a stat or a metric or even a very short story, to make it tangible to them. One of the ways I like in this tangibility idea is, I'll say, like, back when I was in, I don't know, it was in high school or college or something, all the fast food restaurants, somebody got the bright idea to start putting these giant posters in the restaurant of their nutritional info and the ingredient lists of their different products. I don't know, maybe they were made forced to do it or something, but it's that tangibility is when you know, like, I know, a Whopper is not good for me, right? Like, I know it's a treat, it's fast food, it's fried. Like, I know it's not good for me. But there's a difference between generally know it's not good for me and reading that nutritional profile, reading the ingredients and going like, wow, okay, I knew it wasn't good for me, but like I had no idea it was that bad, right?
Yep.
So it's the
Yep.
difference between saying I'm running to improve schools and then saying 42% of our students are not testing at grade level on reading.
Yeah.
Right? Like everybody kind of, it's an esoteric platitude to talk about I'm running to make the schools better. I'm running because I care about the kids, right? Like I'm running to make schools safe, right? I'm running to improve academics. Like all of those are laudable things, but it just goes over someone's head, right? You've got to bring it right to their doorstep. And now they're paying more attention and now they're going to connect with your urgency message of why you have to get out and vote, this election. Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense, and there's two pieces to that that really stood out to me. One with the authenticity, and again, stupid easy. I love it, but that really there is a gosh. I used to work in business, so my big thing was, and I did a lot with hiring, and you would see the standard wording that was put into every resume and every cover letter. And you just get to where it's like, okay, great. I'm glad you put it there, but nobody really
Right. It
actually
doesn't
needs
really
it.
tell you anything.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything anymore, because everybody says it. And if you don't say it, then you're not going to actually get reviewed or brought in for an interview. And what stands out to me is that like elitist messaging, really this like we're so the in club, like you were talking about, versus honestly a great example of it, I think, is Spencer Pratt and his campaign and how incredibly real he was.
Yes.
And he didn't do anything. He used language in particular that was easy to understand. He spoke in real words, not that these big, wonderful words aren't real words, but let's be real, the average reading level for most people is not at this, college grad level. It's just not.
It's
It's
at a
barely.
fourth grade level,
That's what I was
actually.
going to say. I think it's not even in high school. It's
Yeah.
I knew it was low. So folks need to remember that when you're having a conversation, so that you're not like making someone think too hard about what you just said. But the other thing that you really called out there, that as I was thinking about how you were saying it stood out to me that getting that aha moment almost, or that aha statistic, that's something that's in your face, will help you stand out from the crowd. Because otherwise, if everybody's message is that, just like the whole thing you were saying before about being safe, well, okay, you're not really different than anyone else, so maybe I just go vote for so and so because it's all the same. But if
Or I
you're
don't
able,
need to go vote at all because
or I
it's
don't
all
need to
the
go vote at
same.
all. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
That's usually what ends up happening.
Yeah,
Is
which
they
makes
don't
more
even vote at
sense.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, because
So
people don't
even
want
a
to go vote.
story can be short, right? One of the other
Hmm.
problems candidates have, experienced candidates and first time candidates have, is it's too much,
Yes.
right? Especially first time candidates almost think they have to information dump to appear credible, right? It's
Yeah.
in sales, we used to call that show up and throw up. Right. Someone who really wasn't very good at their job yet, like would just show up and throw up everything they knew because
Yeah.
they didn't really know what else to do.
Yeah.
And candidates will also do that sometimes, but like an effective short story can be, I mean, this has happened in multiple trainings where I've heard people who, I'll say, tell me why you're running for school board, and they'll say, well, my daughter was pulled out of class and met one on one with a counselor and was told that, because she had some kind of anxiety, that she was probably a boy stuck in a girl's body, and that this went on without our knowledge, without our permission and consent for 6 months. And I'm running to make sure that no other parent has that experience again. How much time did it take me to say that? 15 seconds?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't have to be a super long, drawn out, big thing. There was a guy, I remember this in Ohio last summer. He was running for school board, older guy. I mean, it's a simple question. Why are you running? Right. And he kind of just hemmed and hawed. And then he was just kind of like, okay, well, do you want me to tell you the real reason? And I was like, yes, please. And he said, I'm really running because those three guys over there have been on the school board the last 3.5 years and they can't get anything done without a majority. And if there's four, we'll have a majority. I said, that's all you need to say. You don't need to make some contrived thing up that you think people want to hear, that you think makes you sound like an official politician, right? You can say exactly that and people get it. And to your point of Spencer Pratt, that's exactly what he does. And candidates have to remember there's a difference between when you're talking and then writing for someone to read it. Right.
Mm,
So if you're talking about your written literature or your campaign website or your campaign social media pages where people are reading that, right, the writing and the wording and things can be different than when you're speaking with them. When you're speaking with them, you want to be conversational just like you'd be talking to somebody just standing right next to you in the grocery line, right? I mean, are you going to pull out all these like super formal things? If you are, you're going to end up sounding like Fraser Crane, right? Which I'll date myself there, but right, where he's the joke of that character is that he always managed to work into conversation that he went to Harvard. Right?
yeah,
So it's like, oh, please with that. So I think voters recognize immediately if you can make it really stupid easy for them to understand why they should care, why vote for you, and why they have to get up and do something this time, make that compelling urgency. That's what they're actually looking for. So that's
yeah,
really not as much as everybody thinks is required to run for office.
yeah. But it's so true. It really, really is true. And I think that actually something else that I think contributes it or is an underlying piece to why it's so important to be authentic and real and simple. Um, for someone to understand and connect with is because with this rise of AI, which just makes everyone question anything and everything. So if you're able to get that personal connection and be real, truly real, not that, live your authentic self kind of real,
Right.
but genuinely being authentic, that makes such a difference. So, all right, we've covered all sorts of things. So now let's dive over into what it might look like if someone is getting ready. So they've been told that they should run, they feel like they're relatively qualified, they've got a general concept. What does it look like to have someone start preparing to run for school board?
Yeah, it's a great question. We developed at Moms for Liberty a resource that is just fantastic. We call it the campaign kit. It includes three pieces to it: a candidate handbook, which is basically a primer. It tells you exactly what you're asking, which is what do I do and when do I do it and how do I do it? Right. The second piece is what we call the workbook, candidate workbook, which is a souped up spreadsheet that has a matching tab in it in Excel format or numbers that goes with each section in the handbook. And you could literally run your entire campaign out of that workbook. And then the third piece we call the collateral collection, which is about 20 some done for you templates of graphic design. And this is all according to best practice of what really works on candidate collateral. And they're pre-formatted in the sizes of things most candidates use, like business cards, door hangers, palm cards, yard signs, things like that. And you can literally like click on one that you think looks pretty good. It'll take you right into the tool where it's designed. You can make the appropriate edits, obviously your own name and that type of thing. And if you like what you see, you save it in a PDF and send to your favorite printer. And then you didn't have to hire a graphic designer or try and reinvent the wheel. And it is a way to help candidates, especially newer first time candidates or candidates who have run before unsuccessfully, to hit the ground running. And this came from one of our co founders, Tina Deskovich, who's our CEO now. She ran for her local school board before the pandemic shut down. And, once she made the decision, she said she did all kinds of research and, talked to her county party and all this stuff to say, like, well, what do I do? And there was like nothing out there really. So she really remembered that and was instrumental in driving our team to create that resource. And the winning workshop really goes with that. We really pull out the formula highlights and key pieces of that tool to really help people know, where do I start? When do I start? What do I need to know? And the answers to those things are going to vary a lot by what office are you running for and where do you live. So, for example, local school boards, not every state has local school board races every year. So where I live in the state of Kansas, for example, there's no local school board races this year, but there are 4 seats up out of 7 next year. However, we do have state school board races this year, right? But in other states, there are races every year for local school board races. It just depends on which seats, right? In some states like Wisconsin, their school board races take place at a totally different time of year than the rest of the election. So they
Wow.
take place in April instead of where most of the races take place in November. Right? So the answer to like when's the ideal time to start and how long should I plan and what should I do is going to heavily depend on what you're running for, what are the rules, what are the date, important dates, and our handbook and our workbook have all of those things to show you where you can, right, keep track, find out all about that, and to start mapping out what you need to do and when.
Oof, there is so much. I'm so glad we have this kit that helps candidates genuinely, because it is, I mean, so I was the judge of election for my local precinct, and I remember the very first election that we had. I This shows you how little I knew about the whole process. But it was after 2020. I'm like, I have to be involved in elections. It was when everyone felt kind of got activated to needing to be involved, right? And I I got a letter about an election in May, and it was primary, but I had no idea there was even an election in May. So that was something that was the kind of eye opening thing as a candidate. It's good to know there's a lot of different pieces to it. So maybe you could tell us a couple of especially for first time candidates, what would be some of the most important things to know about, like, fundraising and outreach or any public speaking, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the very first thing you need to know as a candidate is what are the rules, right?
Mm,
So for the office you're running, what are the rules of when you have to file? What does it mean to file? This is another thing that's different in every place and for every role. In some states, you have to actually get signatures that then are verified for you could file to run, but if you don't have the verified signatures, then you don't appear on the ballot, right? So am not exaggerating when I say like the rules are really different everywhere. The timing is really different everywhere. How you win a race is different everywhere. In some races, it's like the top 3 vote getters get the 3 seats. In others, like it works differently. So knowing the rules and the dates is number one. Number two is pull the voter data. What arguably the most important thing in our campaign kit is a page in the workbook called Vote Goals. And this is a formula. The formula is already baked into the spreadsheet tab. And it is a way to determine how many votes are actually needed to win the race you're running in the year you're running it. So it's not specific to you personally. It's for anybody, let's say, running in that school board race in this year.
mm,
And it takes a number of things into account to make that forecast and estimation. And you need to really understand how many votes is it going to take for you to win in the year that you're running. And then when you apply the 7 to 10 touches on average, right? So if you need 10,152 votes to win versus 110,152 votes to win, right? Your level of outreach needed is dramatically different, right?
mhm,
And also even trying to develop a target list, which is another tab in the workbook, and all of this is explained in the handbook and certainly in our training too, right? To see what would be my strategy to win, right? Can I run a machine playbook? Like, do I have a machine behind me? Maybe you do. There's a lot of different types of machines. There's political machines, there's industry specific machines like the big ed machine, right? In a lot of places, there are families or business people that just kind of seem to own the town, and they have a machine, right? So you might have a machine behind you. So are you going to run that playbook? Or if not, how would I tackle the grassroots, more data driven, targeted piece to see how viable are you as a candidate? That's really what
mhm.
you're measuring, right? And when you understand the rules and dates, and then you understand the data is going to tell you what you need to do. What are you going to execute in your campaign to give yourself a reasonable shot at winning? And I think those are the first two things that have to be done if you're a serious candidate.
That is so helpful to have just those immediate things right away because, and I want to say though, I just want to remind everyone, if you're listening to this and you've maybe had it at the back of your mind, or maybe you know someone that you think would be a good candidate, or you're just not even sure, but you're thinking about it, this might sound overwhelming, but remember that first of all, you're not alone. Second of all, you've got help. Thirdly, we've put this whole thing together to help you. So just take a look at it. Don't feel overwhelmed. There's a lot to know for sure, but you're not doing this coming out from nothing. So
It's also
that's really
free.
important.
Everything I just said costs no money. So certainly our whole campaign kit is free, but also even getting a hold of the voter data that I just mentioned is free. So in every different location, it's going to be a different entity with a
Mm,
different name that has it. Some places it's a board of elections or a division of elections or a city clerk or a whatever, right? Like the title will change, but there's a governmental entity that is required to give you this data for free. In addition to that, if you are running as a Republican or would plan to run as a Republican, I know for a fact that every state GOP has access to this kind of data through various apps, and that the national RNC gives that to state GOP. So I know for a fact that's a second way you can get access to data. And sometimes there's even some deeper levels of that, including some predictive data. I imagine for independents or Democrats, there's probably something similar, but at the bare minimum, it is absolutely free to get like the basics of data. And what do I mean by the data, right? I mean the number of eligible current registered voters for the race that you're running in, right? Because of course that's going to depend very much, right? Depending
mhm.
on the race. And so the good news is if you know, I really have, right? I need to know dates, I need to know rules, I need to know data. That's three things, and they're all free.
Yeah.
So really, while it does require some work, um, it's actually pretty simple, right? It is kind of stupid easy.
Mhm.
And then you go through and if you utilize our campaign kit, you plug in certain numbers, it spits out the votes. You look at how to, put together a target voter list if you're running a grassroots campaign versus the machine, right? And that should give you a good idea. And then you can bring in people who you trust, people who have a track record of winning, right? Whether they've run for office themselves, whether they've helped people run for office on their campaign team, or if they're a consultant of some kind, right? Because a lot of people, which I is why I sarcastically use that phrase, the wizards of smart, right? You have a lot of people who mouth off about what you should do and what you shouldn't do as a candidate. You're going to get a lot of unsolicited advice. And I always say you can listen to whatever you want, but really only do things that winners do.
There you go. Well, and so this is for now, we've spent a large amount of time, as is important, talking about what candidates, folks who are actually interested in running for office, could do, should think about, etc. But maybe there's some people, I'm sure there's some people who maybe don't feel like they're the right person to run for office. Maybe they genuinely have just no interest, but they still want to participate. They still want to support someone. How can they get involved and still make a difference and help someone maybe stay involved locally? How can they do that if they're not running for office?
Oh, there's so many ways. It really just depends on your interests and time. But let's say the most direct ways that you can get involved is if there's a topic that you are just particularly interested in. Maybe it has something to do with your city, right? Maybe you've served on your garden committee in the city. And so, you've gotten to know your city council member or what have you, and they're up for office, and you ask them, like, what can I do to help you? Right? I mean, it start with an area that has some interest for you, right? And then if there is a candidate or a person that you think might be interesting to support in some way, then ask them, how can I help you? Right? What kind of help do you need? Or maybe they don't need help and they might say, I really have all the help I need, but gosh, would you be interested in helping so and so? Or gosh, this area over here really could use a hand. The other way that you can do that is through other kinds of grassroots groups like Moms for Liberty, but also other kinds of grassroots organizations in your area or in your state. So, for example, in Kansas, we have groups like Kansans for Life or Kansans for Health Freedom or Kansas Family Voice or a whole bunch of others. And maybe you kind of resonate with that group. And then you say, hey, like, I'm happy to help out. Like, put me on your volunteer list. And the group is sort of organizing, right, efforts that are aligned with their mission. And so you help through that way. But I think if you just start with where you feel a personal interest and a personal attachment that feels important to you, whether it's a group like that or an area of government or a candidate or person running, that's a good way to get started.
Well, I love that because honestly, that's the same kind of message that I try to give with M4L Academy because we cover so many topics and it can feel like a lot when you're starting to just get into the research and understand all of the different things that are happening. And if you're anyone remotely like me, and I'm definitely a high achiever and I always want to do more, more, more. I think many moms are that we are just like, well, I've got to tackle that. I've got to tackle that. I've got to tackle that. And it can seem like it's really overwhelming,
Yeah.
but always try to encourage people the same, like find what is the thing that you're most passionate about and start there because there's always going to be something we need to fix for sure. So let's find something that is the most important to you. And so I love that message to start by looking in an area that is really important to you there. And it may not necessarily be school boards, and that's totally fine. But I do
Right.
recommend go vote in the school board election because that
Right.
is really important, right?
Vote in all of the elections,
All of the
whether you're
elections.
interested or
Yes.
not. But, honestly, even just like hanging out with a friend could be your priority and your friend's interested in helping with whatever. And it's like, okay, well, I'll do that with you. Right. And
Yep.
then you end up learning something, but you just kind of get to do this with your friend. And that's the
Mhm.
priority. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great.
Mhm.
One of the things that share I'll share with people is I'll say, it's great for you um, to be involved, but also like if you're the flip side, like if you're the candidate looking for volunteers or you're the group, the grassroots group, like the Moms for Liberty chapter or the grassroots group looking for members or volunteers, one of the things I always advise is, it's okay to ask somebody for help for a limited thing with a time limit or for a project, right? So sometimes we don't even realize, like when we're kind of pitching for help or for new members, that could come across to somebody as almost like an infinite commitment. I mean, you're not
Mm.
saying like you have to volunteer forever, right? but
Mhm.
but if it's open ended like that, I think some of the hesitation can come in that, like, I'm now committing to this for some open ended amount of time, right? So you could almost flip it in the conversation that we're having, which is maybe the way you also get involved, or do it in a way that feels less overwhelming to you, more manageable for your schedule, energy, anxiety level, whatever it is, lifestyle, is you can say, I am going to, like, I'm willing to help you in this campaign, or I'm going to just go be a poll worker on election day, or I'm, happy to help with this particular project, right? You're working on a new policy in this school board policy, and this, I'm willing to help on this policy or research on this thing. Like, you can create your own timeline or project or boundaries, right? And then it doesn't feel quite like you've just taken on this huge other thing that's never ending. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I really love that that is a practical tip for both candidates and for folks who want to get involved. But I think that is a very real concern because we all feel busy and that I've been on numerous things where I'm like, gosh, how do I get out of this now?
Right.
Because
You
I
need an
don't,
off ramp. Build
yeah,
in the off ramp for them. And then if they want to stay and do more, that's always going to be
great.
welcome. Right. But if
Yep.
you build an off ramp in, you can, I would typically give that advice to groups, like to chapter chairs, right, to other groups. But you can flip that. And also, there's no reason why, as an individual, you can't just build the off ramp for yourself, right? And
Yeah.
say, like, I'm happy to help this year, or I'm happy to help with this thing, or, I'm happy to do this or whatever, and build the off ramp yourself.
Yeah, I love it. That is so good. Well, tell everyone what we'll close out with this. Like, what is the best next step? What would you like to leave as a takeaway, whether for candidates or Like how can they get in contact with us to if they're interested in attending a winning workshop, or for chapters that would like to have one in their states and counties? What does that look like?
Yes. So for chapters, they can just reach out to me. They can reach out to me by email, phone. My contact information's everywhere. And if you're not sure, or you somehow can't find it, just ask anybody else in Moms for Liberty and they've got it. So reach out to me. We'll get something scheduled. It doesn't also have to be for elections that are this year in 2026. Right. We're starting to close in on crunch time for the November elections. There are a couple more primaries in August, but it's perfect time for planning for candidates who are going to run for office in 2027. It's also perfect for people who are considering running for office either next year or even just kind of someday, right?
Yeah.
Because what it maps out for them, it makes it tangible for them to understand, like, oh, I could do that. Right. So reach out to me if you're a chapter chair. I think if you're a candidate and you're looking for help, training, support, whatever, go to momsforliberty.org. There is that big giant map of the United States right on there and a drop down box. And you can see, is there a Moms for Liberty chapter in your county? And if not in your county, nearby. That's a great place to start, because if there is, you've automatically got it in. And if there's one nearby, they can also like direct you, and they have options at Moms for Liberty. We allow our chapters to endorse for local or state school boards or local or state superintendents. Not every state has electable superintendents at the local or state level, but those are the races where they can choose to endorse. We do have state level endorsements where all chapters in the state would have to vote to endorse a candidate. We don't endorse for races outside of those, though. However, there's lots of different ways that if the chapters choose to get involved in supporting their very friendly county commissioners or city council people or house reps or state senators or governors or what have you, right? There's all kinds of ways the chapter gets to really decide where they want to prioritize their efforts and their time. And so, that's where I would say is the great place to get started to look for help.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you for helping us to dive into and unpack exactly what it looks like as advocacy in the area of activating to public service. Because I think sometimes people, like we said in the beginning, it feels like you just have to go to Washington, but that's not the only way to serve, to have public service and to help out and just be involved in your community. So thanks so much, Erica. We really appreciate all you do.
My pleasure. Thank you, Missy.
Well, that was a fantastic overview of advocacy with Moms for Liberty, specifically looking at activating to public service. So if you've ever thought about running for public office, or maybe you know someone that you think would be good for public office, or maybe you're just curious about learning more, I strongly encourage you to reach out so that you can consider attending one of these winning workshops. We might even be doing some virtual ones coming up, which will be, make it a lot more accessible to everybody. But we're here to help you, and Erika is a fantastic resource. If you haven't had a chance already, head over to mforlacademy.org to check out all of the topics that we've covered in our resource library, including social emotional learning, parental rights, gender ideology, and so much more. And of course, as James Madison says, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty, which is the purpose and mission of M4L Academy. Thanks again for joining us. Class dismissed.